Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Rio Bravo in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel friends in today's video. The movie we are going to talk about is called Rio Bravo. I am also going to give you all the information on which op platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So, let's start the video. Rio Bravo is a 1959 American Western film directed and produced by Howard Hawks and starring John Wayne, Dean Martin, Angie Dickinson, Ricky Nelson, Walter Brennan, and Ward Bond. Written by Jules Furthman and Leigh Brackett, based on the short story Rio Bravo by B.H. McCampbell. The film stars Wayne as a Texan sheriff who arrests the brother of a powerful local rancher for murder and then has to hold the man in jail until a U.S. Marshal can arrive. With the help of a lame old man, a drunk, and a young gunfighter, they hold off the rancher's gang. Rio Bravo was filmed on location at Old Tucson Studios outside Tucson, Arizona, in Eastman color, with film processing provided by Technicolor. In 2014, Rio Bravo was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress and selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. Plot: Joe Burdett, the spoiled younger brother of wealthy land baron Nathan Burdett, taunts town drunk Dude by tossing money into a spittoon. The sheriff, John T. Chance, stops Dude from reaching into the spittoon, prompting Dude to lash out and knock Chance unconscious. Joe starts to beat up Dude for fun, then shoots and kills an unarmed bystander who had tried to intervene. Chance recovers, follows Joe into Nathan's personal saloon, and, with help from a penitent Dude, arrests Joe for murder. Chance's friend Pat Wheeler attempts to enter town with a wagon train of supplies and dynamite, but has to force his way through Nathan Burdett's men. Chance reveals that he, Dude, who used to be a deputy before he became a drunk, and his lame old deputy Stumpy are all that stand between Nathan's small army and Joe, whom they wish to free. Chance notices young gunslinger Colorado Ryan in Wheeler's wagon train, but Colorado promises he doesn't want to start any trouble. That night, Carlos Rabante, the owner of the local hotel, warns Chance that Wheeler is trying to recruit fighters. Chance tries to stop Wheeler, not wanting anyone to get hurt on his account. Wheeler asks if Colorado could help, but Colorado declines, feeling that it's not his fight. Chance then notices a rigged card game at the hotel. Recognizing one of the players as Feathers, the widow of a cheating gambler, Chance confronts her. However, Colorado reveals that another player is the cheater. Out in the street, Wheeler is gunned down. Chance and Dude pursue the killer into Nathan's saloon, and Chance allows Dude to prove himself and confront the killer, earning the respect of Nathan's men. Colorado and the rest of Wheeler's men are forced to stay in town to await a court order releasing Wheeler's possessions, and the wagons are left behind the Burdett warehouse. After Feathers secretly stays up all night with a shotgun to guard Chance, an irritated Chance orders Feathers to leave town for her safety. She refuses, and the two begin to bond. Nathan himself rides into town. Stumpy, having old grudges against Nathan for taking his land, threatens to shoot Joe if any trouble starts around the jail. In response, Nathan has his saloon musicians repeatedly play El Degüello, a.k.a. the Cutthroat song. Colorado realizes the song means Nathan will show no mercy and warns Chance. Chance gives Dude back his old guns, some clothes, and a black hat he left behind when he became a drunkard. Dude also gets a shave, trying to start afresh. Unfortunately, Stumpy doesn't recognize Dude when he returns and shoots at him, shattering Dude's nerves. The next day, Dude is still shaky and is ambushed by Burdett's men, who threaten to kill him unless Chance lets Joe go. Colorado and Feathers distract the men long enough for Chance to get his rifle, and he and Colorado shoot down the men and free Dude. Dude thinks about quitting and letting Colorado take his place, but when he hears El Degüello being played, he resolves to see the thing through to the end. Dude and Chance return to the hotel so Dude can take a bath. Burdett's men capture Carlos's wife Consuelo and deliberately make her scream, which lures Dude and Chance into a trap. Dude tells Chance to take the men to the jail, under the pretext that Stumpy would let Joe out. However, Stumpy opens fire, as Dude secretly predicted. In the chaos, some men drag Dude off to Nathan, who demands a trade, Dude for Joe. Chance agrees, but brings Colorado as backup. Dude and Joe brawl during the trade, and a firefight ensues. Stumpy throws some sticks of dynamite from the wagons into the warehouse where Burdett and his men are holed up. Chance and Dude detonate them with their guns, abruptly ending the fight. With both Burdett's and their few surviving gunmen in jail, Chance finally spends some time with Feathers and admits his feelings for her. Colorado volunteers to guard the jail, allowing Stumpy and Dude to enjoy a night out in the town. Cast John Wayne as John T. Chance, Dean Martin as Dude, Angie Dickinson as Feathers, Ricky Nelson as Colorado Ryan, Walter Brennan as Stumpy, Ward Bond as Pat Wheeler, John Russell as Nathan Burdett, Pedro Gonzalez as Carlos Robante, Estelita Rodriguez as Consuela Robante, Claude Akins as Joe Burdett, Bing Russell as the cowboy killed by Joe Burdett at the start of the movie. Uncredited, Nesdon Booth as Clark, Walter Barnes as Charlie the bartender, James B. Leong as Bert. Malcolm Atterbury and Harry Carey Jr. also received screen credits in the film's opening, but their scenes were deleted from the final film. Production exteriors for the film were shot at Old Tucson Studios, just outside Tucson. Filming took place in the summer of 1958, and the movie's credits gave 1958 for the copyright. The film was released in March 1959. Rio Bravo is generally regarded as one of Hawks' best, and is known for its long opening scene which contains no dialogue. The film received favorable reviews and was successful, taking in $5.75 million, the highest-grossing Western of 1959. A brief clip from Rio Bravo was among the archive footage later incorporated into the opening sequence of Wayne's last film, The Shootist, to illustrate the backstory of Wayne's character. As was often the case in a John Wayne Western, Wayne wore his Red River D belt buckle in the movie. It can be clearly seen in the scene when Nathan Burdett comes to visit his brother Joe in the jail where he is being held for the U.S. Marshal, about 60 minutes into the film, and again in the scene where Wayne, Ricky Nelson, and Angie Dickinson deal with 3 of Burdett's men in front of the hotel. The story was credited to B.H. McCampbell. According to Todd McCarthy's 1997 biography, Howard Hawks, the Gray Fox of Hollywood, this was actually Hawks' eldest daughter, Barbara Hawks McCampbell, McCampbell being her married name. Her contribution was the idea of using dynamite in the final shootout. Soundtrack: the musical score was composed by Dmitri Tiomkin. His score includes the hauntingly ominous El Degüello theme, which is heard several times. The Colorado character identifies the tune as the Cutthroat Song. He relates that the song was played on the orders of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna to the Texans holed up in the Alamo, to signify that no quarter would be given to them. The tune was used in Wayne's film The Alamo, 1960. Composer Ennio Morricone recalled that director Sergio Leone asked him to write Dmitri Tiomkin music for A Fistful of Dollars. The trumpet theme is similar to Tiomkin's Degüello. The Italian title of Rio Bravo was Un Dollaro d'Onore, a dollar of honor. Because the film starred a crooner, Martin, and a teen idol, Nelson, Hawks included 3 songs in the soundtrack. Before the big showdown, in the jailhouse, Martin sings My Rifle, My Pony, and Me, which contains new lyrics by Webster to a Tiomkin tune that appeared in Red River, accompanied by Nelson, after which Nelson sings a brief version of Get Along Home Cindy, accompanied by Martin and Brennan. Over the closing credits, Martin, backed by the Nelson Riddle Orchestra, sings a specially composed song, Rio Bravo, written by Tiomkin with lyrics by Paul Francis Webster. Nelson later paid homage to both the film and his character Colorado by including the song Restless Kid on his 1959 LP, Ricky Sings Again. Members of the Western Writers of America chose My Rifle, My Pony, and Me as one of the top 100 Western songs of all time. High Noon Debate. The film was made as a response to High Noon, which is sometimes thought to be an allegory for blacklisting in Hollywood, as well as a critique of McCarthyism. Wayne later called High Noon un-American and said he did not regret helping run the writer Carl Furthman out of the country. Director Howard Hawks went on the record to criticize High Noon by saying, "I didn't think a good sheriff was going to go running around town like a chicken with his head cut off asking for help, and finally his Quaker wife had to save him." According to film historian Emmanuel Levy, Wayne and Hawks teamed up deliberately to rebut High Noon by telling a somewhat similar story their own way, portraying a hero who does not show fear or inner conflict and who never repudiates his commitment to public duty, while only allying himself with capable people, despite offers of help from many other characters. Chance also cites concerns for the safety of those that offer to help, and his fears are confirmed when the first such offer results in the character being quickly killed. In Rio Bravo, Chance is surrounded by allies, a deputy who is brave and good with a gun, despite recovering from alcoholism, Dude, a young, untried but self-assured gunfighter, Colorado, a limping, crippled old man who is doggedly loyal, Stumpy, a Mexican innkeeper, Carlos, his wife, Consuelo, and an attractive young woman, Feathers, and repeatedly turns down aid from anyone he does not think is capable of helping him. Reception. In the United Kingdom, Rio Bravo was not originally even reviewed for Sight and Sound. Leslie Hallowell gave the film 2 out of 4 stars in his film guide, describing it as a cheerfully overlong and slow-moving Western that was nevertheless very watchable for those with time to spare. The film was taken more seriously by British critics such as Robin Wood, who rated it as his top film of all time, and wrote a book on it in 2003 for the British Film Institute, publishers of Sight and Sound. Pauline Kael called the film silly, but with zest. There are some fine action sequences, and the performers seem to be enjoying their roles. Rio Bravo was the second highest-ranking Western, 63rd overall in the 2012 Sight and Sound Critics poll of the greatest films ever made. In 2008, the American Film Institute nominated this film for its top 10 Western films list. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 96% of 50 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 8.410. The website's consensus reads, Rio Bravo finds director Howard Hawks and his stellar ensemble cast working at peak performance, and the end result is a towering classic of the Western genre. Director Quentin Tarantino called Rio Bravo his favorite hangout movie. He once said that if his date doesn't like the film, there will be no relationship. Legacy? Howard Hawks went on to direct 2 loose variations of Rio Bravo with the idea of a sheriff defending his office against belligerent outlaws. John Wayne starred in both films, released as El Dorado in 1966 with Robert Mitchum playing a variation of Dean Martin's original role, and Rio Lobo in 1970. The 1976 film Assault on Precinct 13, directed by John Carpenter, was inspired by the story and setting of Rio Bravo. Music: My Rifle, My Pony and Me, sung by Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson. Cindy, sung by Ricky Nelson, Dean Martin, and Walter Brennan. Rio Bravo, sung by Dean Martin. Comic book adaptation. Dell 4-color, Ruteno 18, June 1959, illustrated by Alex Toth. Move aside Hitchcock, Wells, Ozu, and Ophuls. They only managed to make what I consider the greatest movies. Howard Hawks made the ones I love. Rio Bravo, not to be confused with Rio Lobo or the director's other pale imitation, El Dorado, is Hawks' masterpiece. And a weekend BBC movie matinee slot some 3 decades ago was a perfect introduction. Watching Rio Bravo demands the best part of an afternoon or evening and a particular frame of mind. It is a nigh-on 2.5-hour Western in which the tumbleweed lazily rolls across the main street from one character to another. Of course, there are shootouts, but there is also time to include a languorous duet from 2 late 50s celebrities, showbiz crooner Dean Martin and pop idol Ricky Nelson. And, as with all Hawks' films, lots and lots of talking. What there's precious little of is plot. Simply put, John Wayne's marshal and his bunch of misfits are guarding the jail from the lawless Brackett clan aiming to free the gang leader's brother, who is likely to hang for murder. Famously, Hawks drew his inspiration from High Noon, which he hated, and in which, as the director put it, Gary Cooper ran around trying to get help and no one would give him any. And that's rather a silly thing for a man to do, especially since at the end of the picture he is able to do the job by himself. Hawks proceeded to do the opposite in Rio Bravo, and the only help Wayne gets is from a drunk, Martin, a rookie teenage gunslinger, Nelson, a disabled man, a memorable portrayal by Walter Brennan, and a woman on the run from the law herself, played by a young Angie Dickinson. They answer respectively to the names Dude, Colorado, Stumpy, and Feathers. Wayne is known by his surname, Chance. The use of nicknames is important. Hawks' richly drawn characters are on familiar terms with each other, and, just as importantly, the audience feels close to and is rooting for them. These are people moviegoers are going to enjoy spending time with. We feel deeply involved as each of them faces up to their particular challenges. What mattered to the director was creating a world in which, as happened time and again in his movies, a group of professionals, typically men, have to prove themselves to others in that group, or gain or renew their self-respect or strive for redemption. Those only familiar with Martin's appearance in the Rat Pack films and as straight man to the madcap, Jerry Lewis, will be astounded. Hawks revealed that the actor Singer, whose reputation for heavy drinking was already widely known, was hungry for the part. And I defy anyone not to be moved when dude pours his last glass of whiskey back in the bottle without spilling a drop, to signify he has overcome the DTs and is ready for the climactic showdown. The same is true of the scene when Feathers breaks down with relief after she has helped save Chance, the man she loves, but only at the expense of 4 other men's lives. I have watched this scene and heard Feathers' speech innumerable times, and I still can't say I fully grasp its complexities. Critic Robin Wood, in his BFI Film Classics monograph on the movie, writes of the character's existential choice. And in her exclamation, "We're all fools," there's certainly an echo of another of my favorite films, Limelight. In that 1952 movie, a fading music hall star, played by Charlie Chaplin, and a suicidal ballet dancer, Claire Bloom, look to each other to salvage some hope and give meaning to their lives. "We're all amateurs," declares Chaplin at one point. "We don't live long enough to be anything else." The idea that friendships, underlined and shaped by our choices and actions, give our lives meaning is central to Rio Bravo too. Brennan's Stumpy, for the most part a comic foil to the film's stars, has a similar role to his one in Hawks's To Have and Have Not, in that, in both, he is utterly loyal to those who have taken a stand. In the earlier film against Nazis in occupied France, here in opposition to rapacious land, Baron Nathan Burdett. 460 acres might be little to you, Nathan, but it was a lot of country to me, he says. In answer to the villain's suggestion, he bears a grudge. If all this makes Rio Bravo sound like a po-faced treatise, that is most definitely not the case. Hawks's movies took in every major genre from gangster, Scarface, to sci-fi, The Thing from Another World, film noir, The Big Sleep, to musical, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, but can broadly be categorized as either comedy or adventure films. Compelling cases have been made for each in the case of Rio Bravo. It is one of the film's lasting delights, and evidence of Hawks's supreme achievement, that it switches effortlessly between both. As in similar Hawks movies, such as Only Angels Have Wings, and indeed To Have and Have Not, where the threat of death is a constant backdrop, the tension is palpable, but Rio Bravo effortlessly segues from a scene in which Wayne and co. are in the most danger to the funniest, when the sheriff mockingly kisses Stumpy after he has complained he never gets any thanks, and Brennan reacts by whacking Wayne on the backside with a broom. Hawks also makes Feathers' pursuit of John T. Chance as enjoyable as any movie seduction in the era of the Hays Code. No other director had such fun with the sex war, or subjected his male leads to such indignities at the hands of their female counterparts. Think Cary Grant in Katharine Hepburn's flouncy dressing gown in Bringing Up Baby, Rock Hudson's humiliations in Man's Favorite Sport, or Grant, again, wearing women's clothes in I Was a Male War Bride. Hawks clearly relishes the games he plays with the Wayne persona and Chance's flummoxed reaction to Dickinson's pursuit. Over the course of Rio Bravo, we are treated to an entertainment masterclass, a high watermark of Hollywood cinema in its heyday. I may not go as far as Quentin Tarantino, who declared that he would show the film to any new girlfriend and end the relationship if she did not declare her undying love for Hawks's classic. But it is the movie I return to again and again to revisit old friends and remind myself what form optimism takes in a work of art. Howard Hawks didn't direct a film for 4 years after the failure of his Land of the Pharaohs in 1955. He thought maybe he had lost it. When he came back to work on Rio Bravo in 1958, he was 62 years old, would be working on his 41st film, and was so nervous on the first day of shooting that he stood behind a set and vomited. Then he walked out and directed a masterpiece. To watch Rio Bravo is to see a master craftsman at work. The film is seamless. There is not a shot that is wrong. It is uncommonly absorbing, and the 141-minute running time flows past like running water. It contains one of John Wayne's best performances. It has surprisingly warm, romantic chemistry between Wayne and Angie Dickinson. Dean Martin is touching. Ricky Nelson, then a rival of Elvis's, and with a pompadour that would have been laughed out of the Old West, improbably works in the role of a kid gunslinger. Old Walter Brennan, as the peg-legged deputy, provides comic support that never oversteps. Wayne and the other men and the gambling lady inhabit a town that is populous and even crowded. But not a single citizen, except for an early victim, a friendly hotel owner and his wife, and of course the villain, ever says a word to them. The shadows are filled with hired killers with $50 gold pieces in their pockets. The price of a human life. All that buys Wayne and his deputies a stay of execution is the prisoner they precariously hold as a hostage. In a film with suspenseful standoffs and looming peril, even a scene where Wayne and Martin walk down Main Street after nightfall is frightening. The story situation was fashioned by Jules Furthman and Leigh Brackett, two veterans who wrote Hawke's great film The Big Sleep, 1946. It centers on four men holed up inside a sheriff's office, a seasoned lawman, a drunk, an old coot, and a kid. This formula would prove so resilient that Hawks would remake it in El Dorado, 1966. John Carpenter would remake it as Assault on Precinct 13, 1976. And directors from Scorsese to Tarantino to Stone would directly reference it. It is a Western with all of the artifice of the genre, but the characters and their connections take on a curious reality. Within this closed system, their relationships have a psychological plausibility. Wayne, as Sheriff John T. Chance, plays what he himself called the John Wayne role. He even wears the same hat, now battered and torn, that he had worn in Westerns ever since John Ford's Stagecoach, 1939. Yet here, he calls upon the role and his own history to bring nuance and depth to the character. Grumpy old Ford, seeing Hawks' Red River, said, "I never knew the big son of a bitch could act." Wayne is effective above all when he simply stands and regards people. "I don't act, I react," he liked to say. And here you see what he meant. His Chance doesn't feel it necessary to impose himself, apart from the formidable fact of his presence. He never sweet-talks Feathers, Dickinson. Indeed, tends to be gruff toward her, but his eyes and body language speak for him. There is a moment when he is angered that she didn't get on the stage out of town, stalks upstairs to her hotel room, barges through the door, and then, in the reverse shot, sees her and transforms his whole demeanor. Can you say a man softens simply by the way he holds himself? With the most subtle of body movements, he unwinds into the faintest beginning of a courtly bow. You don't see it, you feel it. Dickinson was 27, looked younger when she made the film, her first significant feature role after bit parts in TV. Wayne was 51, no matter. They fit together. They liked each other. They make this palpable without throwing themselves at each other. If you will go to chapter 21 of the DVD, you will see a romantic scene so sweet and unexpected it may make you hold your breath. Dickinson absolutely holds the screen against the big man. Her carriage and deep, rich voice project a sense of who she is. Not a saloon floozy, but a competent professional gambler accustomed to sparring with men. She was the type of woman Hawks liked and returned to time and again. Lauren Bacall, Katharine Hepburn, Carol Lombard, Jean Arthur, Rosalind Russell, indeed the future studio executive Sherry Lansing. He loved to use again what had worked for him earlier. When Dickinson asks Wayne to kiss her a second time because it's even better when two people do it, there's an echo of Bacall in To Have and Have Not, telling Bogart, it's even better when you help. Peter Bogdanovich notices this in a supplement on the DVD and praises the long opening sequence in Rio Bravo, which runs, he says, 5 minutes without dialogue. And no wonder, Hawks used the business of a coin thrown into a spittoon in the silent film Underworld, 1927, for which he wrote the scenario. And where might Hawks have found inspiration for the scene where Wayne lifts Dickinson in his arms and carries her upstairs? Much of the strength of the Chance character comes from the way he holds himself in reserve, not feeling the need to comment on everything. His delicate relationship with Dean Martin's alcoholic character Dude involves a minimum of lectures and a lot of simply waiting to see what Dude will do. When Dude and Old Stumpy, Brennan, get in a loud argument, Hawks holds Chance in center background, observing, not interfering. Chance is always the unspoken source of authority, the audience the others hope to impress. The score by Dmitri Tiomkin evokes a frontier spirit when it wants to, but also helps deepen the film, which rarely for a Western marks the passage of days with sunsets and sunrises and makes the town streets seem lonely and exposed. There is also the introduction of a theme known to the Mexicans as the Cutthroat Song, which the villain Burdett, John Russell, orders the band to play. Chance reads it as a message. No quarter taken. The song haunts the film. There is another use of music that some will question. In a lull in the action, the men relax inside the barricaded sheriff's office. and Martin, resting on his back with his hat shielding his eyes, begins to sing about a cowboy's loneliness. Nelson picks up his guitar and accompanies him. Then Ricky sings an up-tempo song of his own, with Martin and even Brennan in harmony. Does this scene feel airlifted in? Maybe, but I wouldn't do without it. Martin and Nelson were two of the most popular singers of the time, and the interlude functions well as an affectionate reprise for the men before the final showdown. Needless to say, Sheriff Chance doesn't sing along. The brave sheriff takes a stand against the outlaws who threaten a town. It is a familiar Western situation, which may remind you of High Noon, 1952. In 1972, I interviewed Wayne on the set of his Cahill U.S. Marshal in Durango, Mexico. High Noon came up, as it will when Westerns are being discussed. "What a piece of you-know-what that was," he told me. "I think it was popular because of the music. Think about it this way. Here's a town full of people who have ridden in covered wagons all the way across the plains, fighting off Indians and drought and wild animals in order to settle down and make themselves a homestead. And then, when three no-good bad guys walk into town and the marshal asks for a little help, everybody in town gets shy. If I'd been the marshal, I would have been so goddamn disgusted with those chicken-livered yellow sons of bitches that I would have just taken my wife and saddled up and rode out of there." Rio Bravo, the acclaimed 1959 Howard Hawks Western, showcases a perfectly cast John Wayne in the kind of role he defined during his 4+ decades of appearing before the camera. Although aspects of the movie have a dated feel when viewed long after its release, the core story, that of an upright sheriff and a small group of stalwarts standing against a gang of gun-toting criminals, remains solid. With an unnecessarily protracted running length of more than 140 minutes, Rio Bravo at times moves too slowly for its own good, but the climax is as rousing as that of any Western made during the decade when the genre was at its peak. As Westerns go, Rio Bravo neither attempts to nor succeeds in bringing much new to the table. The story unfolds in a 19th century Presidio County, Texas town where Sheriff John T. Chance, Wayne, has locked up outlaw Joe Burdette, Claude Akins, for murder. Chance is aided in his law-preserving duties by his deputies, Dude, Dean Martin, a one-time ace gunslinger turned drunk, and the aging hobbled Stumpy, Walter Brennan, who runs the town's jail. Upon hearing of his brother's incarceration, gang leader and landowner Nathan Burdette, John Russell, comes to pay a visit. He makes it clear that, one way or another, his brother will be walking out of jail. It's up to Chance whether he wants to get out of the way or become a casualty. Although most citizens of the town fade into the background when the possibility of a shootout looks likely, Chance finds a few allies. An old buddy of the sheriff's, Pat Wheeler, Ward Bond, rides into town and offers his help and that of his new protege, Colorado Ryan, Ricky Nelson. When Pat is shot dead by one of Burdette's hired assassins, Chance takes it personally. Another newcomer to Rio Bravo is Feathers, Angie Dickinson, a tough-talking, poker-playing woman who is attracted to the taciturn lawman. The two flirt, and the flirting turns into a stronger attachment. Finally, the owner of the local hotel, Carlos, Pedro Gonzalez, throws in his lot with the sheriff. Rio Bravo was a favorite of both Wayne and director Howard Hawks. In fact, they liked it so much that they collaborated on two quasi-remakes, 1966's El Dorado and 1970's Rio Lobo. Both of the later films again featured Wayne as the straight-as-an-arrow righteous man and followed the same general plot. Other than the star, however, none of the actors returned for the remakes. John Carpenter, an admitted fan of Rio Bravo, used elements of the story in both his 1976 thriller, Assault on Precinct 13, and his 2001 sci-fi outing, Ghosts of Mars. With crooner Dean Martin and young singing sensation Ricky Nelson in the cast, the temptation to include a couple of musical numbers, My Rifle, My Pony and Me, and Cindy, was apparently too great for Hawks to resist. One might wish he had done so. The movie grinds to a halt for what amounts to a 6-minute musical intermission on the night before the big confrontation. In his 4-star review of the film, Roger Ebert admits that the songs may be out of place while confessing his affection for them. He writes, "Does this scene feel airlifted in? Maybe, but I wouldn't do without it." For me, the movie would have been considerably stronger without the unfortunate interlude. It's tempting to say that John Wayne is adhering to his typical John Wayne image, and although there's some truth to that, it may be giving the actor too little credit. Wayne says a lot more with his body language than he does with his dialogue, and Chance comes across as a deeper character than one might initially suppose. He is well matched by Angie Dickinson, and while no one is going to call the pair one of Hollywood's great screen couples, there's enough chemistry for us to ignore the nearly 25-year age gap. Dean Martin sometimes overacts, and Ricky Nelson is often badly in need of acting lessons. The always delightful Walter Brennan provides effective comic relief. It's impossible to discuss Rio Bravo without bringing up High Noon, in large part because the former film was made in part as a repudiation of the 1952 production. Wayne was openly critical of the earlier movie, going so far as to call it un-American. It's interesting that many of Rio Bravo's most ardent supporters, like Hebert, have voiced a dislike of High Noon. More than a half-century later, both productions are generally regarded as classics. 15 years prior to making Rio Bravo, Hawks famously directed Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall in To Have and Have Not, a movie that may offer the best-known example of real-life chemistry burning up the screen. Hawks was also behind the camera when the two were reunited in The Big Sleep. Similarities between the Wayne-Dickinson relationship and that of Bogart and Bacall are intentional, right down to some of the dialogue. The difference was, of course, that there was no off-screen connection in Rio Bravo, and, as a result, there's more smoke than fire. Rio Bravo is as much a cornerstone of Wayne's legacy as Stagecoach, The Searchers, Red River, and True Grit. It came near the apex of his popularity and became one of his best-loved outings. Viewed through the lens of history, Rio Bravo has lost some of its luster, and while the action sequences remain entertaining and the build-up to the final confrontation is fraught with suspense, the movie as a whole tends more toward the generic Western than Wayne's other defining films. I was tempted to tuck away half a dozen Westerns inside my 100 best movies, as I believe that almost everything the American cinema has to say has been said within this genre. And if I allowed my heart to rule my head, there would be half a dozen Howard Hawks movies in there too. Westerns seem to best express the myths of American history and the often noble, sometimes absurd, fantasies Americans have about themselves. As for Hawks, he was a master of this and most other genres, an intuitive director, whose extraordinary subtleties could make even a piece of pure entertainment. Like bringing up Baby into a blazing classic. Combine my love of Westerns and my admiration for Hawks, and you have Rio Bravo, a great film and the most personal one he ever made. I have to tell you, with some shame, that when the film arrived in Britain in 1959, The Guardian's review, not mine, read as follows: Rio Bravo is a typical Western of this age of the long-winded large screen. It lasts for 140 minutes, and it contains enough inventiveness to make do for about half that time. It is, in fact, a soporific blockbuster. John Wayne leads its cast. Thus, we disposed of a piece of flawless storytelling, admirable in its basics, simplicity and outward lack of guile, and of a great and selfless performance. From Wayne, who helped Dean Martin give the best portrait of his career. Hawks always said that he made Rio Bravo as a riposte to High Noon, in which Gary Cooper's sheriff went running around the town like a chicken with his head off asking for help. That wasn't his idea of a Western hero. To him, it was politically incorrect and morally reprehensible. Sheriff Wayne in Rio Bravo needs as much help as Cooper when he imprisons the murderer and gunmen lay siege to the jail. But he gets it by being his flawed, sometimes comic but fundamentally decent and honorable self. This makes even the drunken deputy, Martin, stand up and fight, and the odd partnership it engenders teaches the sheriff to temper his own insistence on independence. Beside the sheriff and the drunk are Ricky Nelson's young gun, Angie, Dickinson's lady gambler with whom Wayne constantly spars, and Walter, Brennan's toothless veteran. In all this, Rio Bravo is a deeply traditional Western. The way it is worked out, however, is anything but that. It's a long film with a pretty slim plot, and lots of comic diversions, like Wayne modeling a pair of bloomers for Dickinson, who tells him, "Those things have possibilities, Sheriff, but not on you." So firmly is the whole thing based on character, however, that you come out of it feeling you've seen something special about humanity in general. It's a feel-good movie that for once rings true, even as you admit a certain strand of orthodoxy, even cliché, that is seen in Westerns time and time again. It's also quite exciting, because although, things will probably turn out okay, Hawks never lets you be quite sure of it. Someone's gonna have to die. Watching the film, you won't see any great vistas, like John Ford's Monument, valley or backdrops like Bud Bodisher's Lonesome Pine nestling in the Alabama hills. This is just a scrubby little township with a seedy hotel, a saloon, a jail, and nothing whatsoever to commend it, bar the characters who live there. If Ford had made the picture, it wouldn't have been possible to avoid a larger cast and more of an idea of the community at large. If Anthony Mann, Another great master of the Western had done it, there would have been more. Directorial philosophizing and the psychology would have been less basic. What we get from Hawks is austerity, rigor, and intensity. Of course, there are a dozen different ways to make Westerns, and Hawks' way in Rio Bravo lacks the epic nature of Red River, the greater flamboyance, and Mitchum of El Dorado, and the sheer if nonsensical fun of Hatari. But it's a better film than any of them because of its concentration and the deep feelings that Hawks clearly poured into it. They say he modeled the Wayne character on himself, but if so, it was surely unconsciously. What he did do was allow a great script by Jules Furthman and Leigh Brackett to flow as naturally as possible, while burnishing it with bits and pieces of extemporizing, right down to what the actors wore, like Martin's soiled sweatshirt and dirty old hat. When Hawks showed Jack Warner the film, Warner said, "We hired Dean Martin. When's he going to be in this picture?" Hawks replied, "He's the funny-looking guy in the old hat." "Holy smoke," said Warner. "Is that Dean Martin?" It was, and in a way it was his picture. If you agree, disagree, or have something to add to Derek's comments as he catalogs a century of film, let's hear from you. Full responses will appear here. Edited letters may appear in the newspaper. Rio Lobo is the disappointing end of a trilogy of John Wayne Westerns, but it could have been saved by one of the star's own suggestions. The Rio Bravo trilogy is an odd one, since none of the films are connected in terms of story. Instead, director Howard Hawks and leading man John Wayne made 3 films that remix the same themes and characters. Considered one of its leading man's best, Rio Bravo is a classic that is both John Carpenter's and Quentin Tarantino's favorite Western. The first sequel, El Dorado, which paired Wayne with Robert Mitchum, was also well received, but Rio Lobo was labeled a damn piece of junk by Hawks himself, via Howard Hawks interviews. This 1970 Western was a critical and commercial dud, and just felt stale compared to the other odors produced during this time, like Once Upon a Time in the West. The film has its defenders, but it's still one of Wayne's lesser entries from this era. As Hawks himself would state, Wayne was also too old to play the lead convincingly. Rio Lobo's main character is Colonel Cord McNally, whose quest to find 2 traitors takes him to the titular town. Wayne is never less than a compelling screen presence, but McNally himself just isn't that compelling a protagonist. There's little depth or dimension to Cord, and it's the type of straight arrow part Wayne played many times before. Things could have been different, though, as when Wayne was first approached by Hawks about the film, he asked, "Do I get to play the drunk this time?" In Rio Bravo and El Dorado, Dean Martin and Robert Mitchum played the best pals of Wayne's protagonists, who were saddled with drinking problems. Martin and Mitchum had the juicier roles, essentially, with the former giving arguably his best dramatic turn as the drunken deputy dude. According to the biography John Wayne, The Life and Legend, Wayne was slightly jealous of his co-star's role, stating to Hawks that Martin gets all the fireworks, doesn't he? Hawks convinced him this wouldn't be an issue, and Wayne figured out how to make the dynamic work between them. After 2 outings where other actors got the flashier parts, it was a missed opportunity Rio Lobo didn't let Wayne play the drunken character. This would have given him a way more interesting part and allowed him to be both hammy and dramatic. There is even a scene where Cord gets tipsy drinking whiskey before he goes to sleep that hints at what his take could have been, and it's the most animated Cord gets in the entire film. Wayne fronted dozens of Westerns during his career and was very much typecast in the genre. Considering he loved them, though, this wasn't a big problem. That said, many of his Western heroes blend together since there isn't much to set them apart. The same could be said of his Rio Bravo trilogy protagonists, who are all riffs on the same role. While Wayne wasn't wrong about Martin or Mitchum overshadowing him, it's not like they completely blew him off the screen either. Still, Martin's character Dude and Mitchum's Sheriff JP are inherently more complex characters. They are good men who have been overwhelmed by their addictions and traumas and struggle to rise to the occasion. Wayne's character dispenses tough love to both his friends, but it would have been real intriguing to see him step into the role for the final entry. Tarantino's love of Rio Bravo is well documented, with the director once claiming that if he showed it to a prospective new girlfriend and she didn't like it, the romance was off. Conversely, Tarantino claims Rio Lobo inspired his upcoming retirement. He says the Western is a prime example of a director sticking around too long and making something that felt tired compared to their earlier work. A harsh assessment, but it can't be denied that Rio Lobo is a long way from Hawks' best. There are myriad issues with the film, including Wayne's co-star Jorge Rivero lacking the screen presence of stars like Martin or Mitchum. Outside of a well-staged train robbery, Rio Lobo has no strong set pieces. Compared to Rio Bravo and El Dorado, this trilogy capper lacks the same energy and humor, though again, there's still fun to be had with it. Had Wayne got to add some color to his character by playing the drunk, this would have injected some much-needed energy too. Jason Statham's first action role was in Ghosts of Mars, which was itself a stealth remake of a John Wayne Western. Released in 2001, Ghosts of Mars marked the final John Carpenter movie for a decade, with the legendary filmmaker taking a long break after feeling burnt out with the industry. The film itself is a fusion of sci-fi, action, and horror, with a dash of Western thrown into the pot. Ghosts of Mars was also one of a run of films set on Mars during this period, including Val Kilmer's Red Planet and Mission to Mars. The movie feels like a mixtape of Carpenter's previous work. Ghosts of Mars takes the cop shop setting of Assault on Precinct 13, the paranoia of the Thing with a main character who feels very much like Kurt Russell's Snake Plissken. There was even a debunked rumor Ghosts of Mars was almost the third escape from movie. The film also marked the action debut of one Jason Statham, following his breakout with Guy Ritchie gangster movies like Snatch. Carpenter first fell in love with cinema thanks to watching sci-fi B-movies and westerns as a boy, and claims he got into the business to helm westerns. Sadly, by the time his career began in the 1970s, the genre was all but dead. While Carpenter never got to direct a true western, most of his work contains elements of that genre. Vampires is basically a Sam Peckinpah film with vampires, while Assault on Precinct 13 is very much a western siege movie. John Carpenter's favorite western is Rio Bravo, where John Wayne's sheriff has to hold on to a dangerous prisoner in his jail while surrounded by killers looking to break the man out. Ghosts of Mars itself is a remake of Rio Bravo with supernatural elements thrown in, where a team of police sent to escort a prisoner from a remote town find themselves besieged by miners possessed by the spirits of long-deceased Martian warriors. This unit is led by Natasha Henstridge's Ballard, who is forced to team up with Ice Cube's Criminal Williams to survive the night. Ghosts of Mars lacks the friendly banter or occasional sing-songs of Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo, but there's a definite kinship between them. Hawks himself helmed a whole Rio Bravo trilogy, with El Dorado and Rio Lobo remixing the same core themes and story beats. Statham himself plays Sergeant Jericho, Ballard's second-in-command and somebody who proves very useful in a fight. Ice Cube has often labeled Ghosts of Mars as the worst movie he's appeared in, via Contact Music, claiming the production didn't have the budget it needed to work. He also refused to promote it. Cube's unhappiness with the project feels apparent in his aloof and oddly sullen performance too. In hindsight, it feels obvious that Ghosts of Mars would have worked better with Statham as Williams, but it needs to be underlined that it was only the actor's fourth film. While Carpenter wanted Statham to play Williams, the studio didn't see it that way. It was also Statham's first action role, so the movie's financiers had no preconceived notion of how he would function in a leading role. It was decided Ghosts of Mars needed some star power, so Statham was out while producers turned to Ice Cube, who was coming off the back of hits like Three Kings and Next Friday. The rapper himself was also a big fan of Carpenter's work and took the film to work with the famed director. Hollywood icon, John Wayne is universally recognized for his Western films, such as Rio Bravo, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and The Shootist. Born in Winterset, Iowa, Wayne gained notoriety after his breakout role in John Ford's 1939 movie Stagecoach, and soon became one of the most popular leading men on the silver screen. While Wayne is considered to be a pioneer of the Western genre, he also starred in a series of classic non-Western films, including The Long Voyage Home and Sands of Iwo Jima. Today, Wayne and his films continue to be favorites among classic cinephiles and have also had a major impact on the work of notable filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, and George Lucas. From The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance to The Sons of Katie Elder, these are 10 of the Duke's highest-rated movies, according to Rotten Tomatoes. When Senator Ransom Stoddard, James Stewart, returns home to attend the funeral of his friend, Tom Doniphan, Wayne, questions arise about the two men's past and their involvement with a ruthless outlaw, Liberty Valance, Lee Marvin, who used to terrorize the town. Stoddard recalls when he first arrived in town as a young lawyer and the events leading up to his showdown with Valance, revealing that there's much more to the now local legend. John Ford's classic Western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, is considered to be one of the greatest Westerns of all time, with captivating performances by Wayne, Stewart, and Marvin. The movie features costumes by the legendary Edith Head, and is one of the few Westerns to have earned an Oscar nomination for Best Costume Design. Despite being a success at the box office, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance earned mixed reviews, but it has since been credited as one of Ford and Wayne's finest films. When Sheriff John Chance arrests the son of a wealthy ranch owner, Joe Burdett, Claude Akins, for murder, his brother, John Russell, and his men are prepared to break Joe out of jail. With the help of a recovering alcoholic, Dean Martin, a young cowboy, Ricky Nelson, and an elderly Spitfire, Walter Brennan, Chance defends his post and fights the outlaws off long enough until reinforcements arrive. Regarded as one of director Howard Hawks' finest films, Rio Bravo is a slow-burning Western noted for its extended opening scene with no dialogue and excellent performances by the overall cast. Director and avid Hawks admirer, Quentin Tarantino ranks Rio Bravo as his favorite Wayne Western and describes the film as a hangout movie, which served as inspiration for the director's 1997 heist movie, Jackie Brown. Land tycoon Bart Jason, Edward Asner, recruits a group of men to force the McDonald family out of town to claim their land. The local sheriff, J.P. Harrah, Robert Mitchum, is too deep in a bottle to help the family, and when word about the incident reaches his friend and gunslinger Cole Thornton, Thornton and his partner, Mississippi, James Caan, travel to El Dorado to help Harrah shape up in time to fight Jason's group of thugs. Film critic Roger Ebert gave Hawks' El Dorado 3.5 out of 4 stars, calling it a successful Western that was effortlessly pulled off by 3 pros of the genre, Wayne, Mitchum, and Hawks. The movie is the second of Hawks, which focuses on a sheriff defending his post against ruthless bandits, coming after Rio Bravo and before Rio Lobo, all featuring Wayne in the same similar role. A group of strangers in Arizona board a stagecoach headed to New Mexico when a notorious outlaw known as the Ringo Kid escapes from prison. With a dangerous criminal on the run, U.S. Marshal Curly Wilcox, George Bancroft, accompanies the stagecoach. Along the way, he finds Ringo, but instead of finding a ruthless gunslinger, he discovers a man who is worthy of a second chance when he helps the marshal protect the stagecoach and its passengers. Wayne delivers his riveting breakthrough performance in Ford's Wild Western Stagecoach, which earned several Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director, marking Ford's second nomination. The movie ended up winning Best Musical Score and Best Supporting Actor for Thomas Mitchell, who was the first male actor to earn the Triple Crown of acting. During World War II, the crew, Wayne, Ian Hunter, Thomas Mitchell, Barry Fitzgerald, of an English cargo ship, are on a voyage from the West Indies to Baltimore, where they are instructed to pick up a load of dynamite. While the dangerous cargo and the treacherous sea put some of the men on edge, their concerns worsen when they learn that a Nazi spy is potentially among them. The long voyage home marked the second collaboration between Wayne and Ford and features several stars from the director's stock company. Film critic Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called Ford's high-sea adventure a gratifying modern odyssey and a powerful atonement to genuine human nature at a time of fear and war. The long voyage home earned 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Cinematography. After the Civil War, Kirby York and his men think he will replace the outgoing commander of Fort Apache. But to their surprise, his replacement is a former general and an arrogant West Point graduate, Owen Thursday, Henry Fonda. Thursday arrives at the fort with his daughter, Shirley Temple, but his ignorance towards the American Indians and desire to reclaim his former glory days cause him to clash with Kirby and his new company. Fort Apache is another top-tier Western directed by Ford and widely regarded as one of the first films to portray an authentic and sympathetic view of Native Americans. Wayne delivers a captivating performance as the tough but empathetic York and provides an alluring perspective on the details that embody a true hero. The movie is also the first installment in Ford's Cavalry trilogy, which also includes She Wore a Yellow Ribbon and Rio Grande, both starring Wayne. Thomas Dunson owns a cattle ranch in Texas, and when he needs money after the Civil War, he plans to take his cattle to Missouri, where he can get a better price. With the help of his faithful ranch hand, Groot Brennan, and his young protege, Matt Montgomery Clift, they lead the cattle to their destination, but the strenuous and exhausting journey starts to take a toll on them. Red River is another Western directed by Hawks, who made a total of 5 movies with Wayne. While Ford directed Wayne in some of the greatest Westerns, the director was blown away by his performance in Red River and jokingly commented, I didn't know the big son of a beach could act. Footage from Red River was also used in Wayne's final film, The Shootist, to establish his character's backstory. During World War II, a group of Marines stationed in the Pacific resent their commanding officer, Sergeant John Stryker, Wayne, and his brutal training methods and coarse attitude. As the fighting progresses, the Marines realize Stryker has been preparing them for the terrifying reality of combat, and if they expect to survive what would become one of the war's worst battles, they must follow Stryker and his strategic battle tactics. Wayne gives an intense performance in the historical war drama, Sands of Iwo Jima, which is based on one of the bloodiest battles of World War II, the Battle of Iwo Jima. The movie features 3 surviving Marines, including Navy Corpsman John Bradley, who was the subject of his son's book, Flags of Our Fathers. In 2006, the book was adapted into a film and directed by Western icon Clint Eastwood. Texas Ranger Jake Cutter, Wayne, is tasked with finding a gambler, Paul Regret, Stuart Whitman, who manages to escape a date at the gallows and return him to Louisiana. Cutter can track Regret down and take him into custody. But along the way, they cross paths with a group of outlaws known as the Comancheros, forcing Cutter and Regret to work together to stop the lawless gunslingers. Directed by Michael Curtis, The Comancheros is based on the 1952 novel by Paul Wellman and features Wayne in a tailor-made Western role, which lines up perfectly with the actor's easygoing but stern persona. The movie earned a majority of positive reviews, including Variety calling it a big, brash and uninhibited, wild film that checks off every characteristic of a classic old-school Western. 4 brothers, Wayne, Dean Martin, Earl Holliman, and Michael Anderson Jr., return home to attend their mother's funeral and discover that their father had gambled away the family's ranch. The brothers agree to avenge their father and win back their home. But the situation quickly takes a deadly turn into serious trouble with the local sheriff and a rival family, the Hastings. Wayne reunited with Martin 6 years after Rio Bravo for The Sons of Katie Elder, which also stars Dennis Hopper, George Kennedy, and Jeremy Slate. Before filming, Wayne had been diagnosed with lung cancer and underwent surgery to remove one of his lungs and 2 of his ribs. Despite the dire diagnosis and intense operation, the Duke insisted on performing his own stunts. Rio Bravo is a great, enjoyable Western that is barely boring, nor does it have that many scenes that drag the pace down. It's a quotable movie I'm sure a lot of people will recognize when any line from this comes up in some discussion that doesn't necessarily have to be about this movie. I'm going to watch more Howard Hawks movies down the road during the 1930s and 40s. Howard Hawks was an unstoppable force of nature churning out a string of classics year after year. Only Angels Have Wings. His Girl Friday, Sergeant York, Balls of Fire. To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep, and Red River. All these titles stand as a collective testament to his prowess. Over a decade later, Rio Bravo is a film that reflects something of the mastery. Howard Hawks still held as a filmmaker, making his way through every interlude with impeccable skill. It showcases his ability to string together scenes in a perfect rhythm, balancing humor with tension, romance with conflict, and making the Western into a thoroughly entertaining experience. Once more, to say Rio Bravo is Hawks' greatest films is not too far off. The truth, he makes it so easy. The way he constantly tracks with his characters in space, often just talking, sometimes serious, others times not, and it's all so fluid, natural, and fun. It's what makes the film that's over 2 hours run seamlessly. Like the sweetest of lure, the script courtesy of Leigh, Brackett, and Jules Furthman is a bounty of inspiration and amusement. One such moment includes the perfect meet-cute between John T. Chance John Wayne and Feathers Angie Dickinson. When she catches him in a compromising position with a pair of red bloomers, from that point on, their dynamic is constantly churning with energy. Dimitri Tumkin's score takes some cues from his earlier work. Red River also, with Hawks, including the addition of the hauntingly sorrowful notes of El DiGello. With such talent as Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, it also makes the prospect of a song a rich opportunity. And Hawks finds ways to weave a musical aside into his film, showcasing the especially memorable tune My Orel, My Pony and Me. Meanwhile, Hawks builds on this almost cartoonish mythology of the West, where every person of interest lives life with a nickname, spending as much time jawing and bickering as they do. Gunslinging, a great deal of that vibrancy is provided by the actors themselves, with John Wayne as our anchor. Walter Brennan and Ward Bond prove to be his wizened counterparts, while Dean Martin, as well as newcomers Ricky Nelson and Angie Dickinson, hold their own against the old vets. It's great fun to watch. Dickinson's spar with Wayne and Nelson lends his Matina idol looks to a laconic role as young gun Colorado in an inspired bit of casting. Dean Martin plays a drunk, and Brennan takes up his post in the jailhouse as Isa Crotchety. Old man, it all fits nicely together, but the question many engaged viewers might ask is whether or not Rio Bravo is a response to the earlier Western High Noon. The concise answer is yes, but that probably is not enough. It's up to the viewer to discern which example is more truthful and honest in its portrayal of humanity in High Noon. Certainly is a somber portrait full of doubt and inner turmoil. However, Rio Bravo is probably just as compelling because of its relational dynamics. John Chance is the sheriff, and as sheriff he has a certain obligation to uphold the law that means keeping murderer Joe Beat at Claudine. Behind bars, he's the non-nonsense harbinger of justice that we expect. And because he's John Wayne, he's also tough as nails. But that's what makes the first scene of the film so crucial. It's notable because it begins with no dialogue opening up on the town drunk in a saloon that also gets a visit from Sheriff John T. Chance, whether it's an act of charity or disdain. Chance saves Elboran's self-respect, only to get bashed over the head. In return, however, this moment is vital in how it sets up Chance's character. Yes, he maintains a rough, even grouchy exterior. But looking closer, you see something else. He holds on to his friendships pretty tightly, namely old reliable Stumpy Brennan, who he bickers with like an old married couple, then his pal Wheeler, Bond, who comes into the modeled-up Texas town with a load of supplies. And they're not the only ones. Chance looks to turn away. A woman who's got her face plastered on wanted posters, but slowly shows an affinity towards her. He certainly would not admit it at first, but he ultimately does care for her deeply. Also, one of his most faithful allies is the spirited hotel owner, Carlos Pedro Gonzalez, who is always ready to come to the sheriff's aid while simultaneously talking his ear off. Lastly, we go back to the Borson who was once Chance's deputy but lost his sobriety in pursuit of a girl. Honestly, many people would not blame Chance for giving up on this man as a lost cause, and at several junctures it looks like he has. But the bottom line is that he never does, and in his own orrery way, he sticks by his old compadre, never deserting him or doubting him in crucial moments. Thus, when we put High Noon up against Rio Bravo, it's not a weak sheriff versus a stalwart sheriff in the conventional sense. As Hawks and Wayne might have supposed, however, what makes Chance strong are the people he surrounds himself with in a way. When he is weak, then he is strong, because he's surrounded by people who are faithful and beholden to him. Yes, he's still John Wayne, and he's one deadly man to cross. But he's a lot more lethal with friends guarding his back, and that's a testament to the people he surrounds himself with, and also the ones who gravitate towards him. You get the sense that these are not fickle relationships. Even in the cinematic sense, the characters can spend as much time ribbing each other as they do toing a gun through town, and perhaps the most telling part is that as an audience, we grow to cherish these characters in a similar way. They're fun to spend time with, and that makes Rio Bravo a true gem. Other information about this film. Nobody makes westerns anymore. What's all that about? And when I say westerns, I mean proper westerns with deserts and cowboys and wide-brimmed hats and horses and outlaws and sheriffs and deputy sheriffs and gunfights and tumbleweeds and stuff. There was a time in the early 20th century when all that came out were westerns. Do you know why? Because they were easy and cheap to make, which sounds like a bad thing. But if you got it right, you could have a good little money spinner. Largely the case would be that the whole film would take place in one location with a rotation of actors and set pieces. So all you'd need is a patch of desert and an imaginative set designer, a saloon, a sheriff's office, a few general stores, and you could shoot all the exteriors in a week or two, then it's into the studio for all the interior shots. Easy peasy. Oh, sure, I'm not going to deny that westerns have been the influence for a lot of movies and TV shows in recent years, for example. A TV show that I was fond of was Justified 2010 to 2015, starring Timothy Olyphant, who plays a U.S. Marshal sent back to his hometown of Kentucky and has a fondness for his wide-brimmed hat and shooting people in the style of a quick draw. Even Breaking Bad 2008 to 2013 had something of a Western influence. What with it being about a man protecting his family from outlaws, and it's set in the desert, and he has a somewhat comedic sidekick in Aaron Paul before the show went all dark. And of course, Deadwood. 2004 to 2006, which is possibly the most faithful of series as we're going to get. Even though Deadwood has much of the same characters and is set in the same town, The show is a million ways away in tone from the 1953 musical Western Calamity. Jane, starring Doris Day, and the movie's countless movies have been associated to this genre, No Country. For Old Men 2007 starring Josh Brolin is a good place to start. Then you've got Once Upon a Time in Mexico 2003 starring Antonio Banderas and the parodies. I'm not going to sit here and name them all. But my favorite, if you're interested, is A Million Ways to Die in the West. 2014, written by Ian Stee, starring Seth MacFarlane and the video games. What with me being a connoisseur, there are a few titles that hold. True to this comparison, Red Dead Redemption, developed by Rockstar of Grand Theft Auto fame, is a top contender, along with Call of Juarez, developed by Techland, who would later go on to make Dying Light. But my favorite is a little game called Fallout New Vegas, developed by Bethesda and could be called an expansion pack of a Fallout 3, which is also amazing. Fallout New Vegas also holds a wonderful connection to this week's movie. I won't tell you what it is just yet, but I'll give you a little clue. Fallout New Vegas has decent music moving on. There's a reason why I love the westerns of the early 20th century, and that's because it's all about the characters. In those days, there were no fancy pants, special effects, no CGI, no nothing, and so all the film had to work. Was the script and the characters. There are quite a few hidden gems in this genre, but the best one that I found is a little film called Rio Bravo, directed by Howard Hawks, starring a veteran of westerns, John Wayne teenage heartthrob, and baby-faced Ricky Nelson, and the legend that is Mr. Dean Martin. Now I know what you're going to say. Why are you watching a movie from nearly 60 years ago? Shouldn't you be watching the newest and most glamorous movie from Hollywood that cost several $100 million to make and is completely soulless and stars Kristen Stewart or Taylor Elner or someone else? Frightful. I say no. I have respect for this style of film and for this era in general. Of course, today we know it all. But back then, directors weren't afraid to try something new to give the audiences something to look at, which is something that's been lost in recent years with the grand advancement of filmmaking technology in the last 2 to 3 decades. Filmmakers have gotten lazy, and it shows, having exhausted a great deal of what my generation has to offer. There's nowhere to go but back in time, that is. So here we go. Rio Bravo, set in the town of Rio Bravo. The film centers around its sheriff John, Teach Chance, John Wayne his deputy, and struggling alcoholic dude, Dean Martin, and their elderly and crippled jailhouse guard who's given the affectionate nickname of Stumpy Walter Brennan after Joe Bit Claude Akins beats up dude in the saloon and kills KS, a bystander who tries to stop him. He's arrested by Chance and incarcerated Joe's brother Nathan Barrett. John Russell is rich and powerful and fully intends to come to his brother's rescue by any means necessary. Chance's friend Pat Wheeler, Ward Bond, arrives in town with a wagon full of supplies. Along with Wheeler is his young companion and sharpshooter, Colorado Ricky Nelson, who more than proves himself as a valuable asset to the local law enforcement. In the meantime, a beautiful and mysterious stranger, nicknamed Feathers, Angie Dickinson, arrives in town and takes a shine to Chance. There's your basic outline. So let's have a better look at the characters, beginning with the headliner, John T. Chance. John Wayne is a legend when it comes to American cinema in the 20th century, but I'm going to be honest. I hadn't seen him in anything before Rio Bravo, and I was impressed with his performance. There's a reason why he was so good, according to IMDb. John Wayne has 107 credits to his name, 100 of which are classed as westerns, beginning with an uncredited appearance in The Great K and a train robbery in 1926. He got his first starring western role 4 years later in The Big Trail. I think it's fair to say that he'd mastered his craft by 1959, aside from defending the town from Brett's crew of hitman Chance's main plotline is the burgeoning romance between himself and Feathers. After a shaky meeting in which Chance accuses her of cheating at a card game, her interests in him grow ever stronger. Even though he constantly makes out that he's not interested from their meeting onwards, Chance is consistently trying to get Feathers onto the next coach to a faraway place. And it's strongly suggested that he's doing it because he's uncomfortable in her presence, but later on, it becomes clear that he wants her to leave because of the inevitable showdown with BDT and he doesn't want her to get hurt. That's never said out loud, but that's the kind of writing that I like. It's all left up to the audience's interpretation rather than fired at your head because the writer doesn't think there are any smart people watching. John Wayne also correctly portrayed Chance as the strong leader that he should be. Not only that, but I also got a fatherly type feeling from his presence. Stumpy, even though he's older than Chance, still takes orders from him without question. and Chance's opinion obviously matters to him. When the showdown with Brackett and his men becomes imminent. Chance wants Stumpy to stay in the jail as his disability puts him at a disadvantage in battle. Stumpy's upset by Chance's remarks, but still shows up on the battlefield anyway. To prove to Chance that he can be of some use in defending his town other than guarding prisoners, Chance is willing to take the young Colorado under his wing, and also offers his help to Dude by keeping him on as deputy so he can keep him from drinking himself to death. Colorado is something of a mysterious character, as we don't know that much about him. We know that he's smart and wise, beyond his years, and he's good with a gun. So you have to ask yourself, how did Colorado get to be the way that he is? I have no idea. But that's the fun of this kind of character. He's only a baby boy himself, but he still shows a caring and nurturing side when he and Feathers assist Chance when he's held up at gunpoint. Feathers has a bit of a turn, but Colorado is right there with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and the other free to offer some comfort. I think that's so cute. Dean Martin has had a rich and varied career on the stage and on film, but most of you reading this will know him as being a part of the Rat Packs, standing alongside Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. on his own. He had several hits over his career, the most popular being That's Amore Valerie and Everybody Loves Somebody, among others. But my favorite Dean Martin song is Ain't That a Kick in the Head, that was written by Jimmy Van Heusen and Sammy K.H. for the movie Oceans 11, 1960, that starred the Rat Pack and was 1F. Aside from being in Oceans 11, Ain't That a Kick in the Head has featured prominently in several movies, TV shows, and video games such as Fallout New. Vegas T. The majority of Dean Martin's film career was comedy-based, as he had a flourishing partnership with comedian Jerry Lewis. I do enjoy it when talented comedic actors find a serious role and run with it. And that's precisely what Dean Martin did with his role as Dude. To me, he got the best role, and that's a totally unbiased opinion. For a start, his character is the only character that goes through an arc. When we first see Dude, he's a stumbling broke drunk who's a shadow of his former self and reduced to scrounging for drinks at the saloon. His lowest moment comes in the opening scene when Joe Barrett flings $1 into the spittoon, and just as he's about to stick his hand in there so he can buy a drink, Chance stops him. As Joe is being arrested, Chance realizes that he's outnumbered, but Dude is right behind him. And even though he's just been beaten up, he can still shoot a gun out of a guy's hand at 20 paces. Oh yes, Colorado isn't the only sharpshooter in town, having been a hard drinker for 2 years and finally hit rock bottom. Dude gets the opportunity to change his life by staying sober, but it won't be easy with no rehab or counselors. It's cold turkey. All the way, the primary symptom of the drying out process in the film is the shakes, which is showcased by Dude as he tries to do his everyday activities such as rolling a cigarette. As a former smoker myself, I just wanted to say, take a deep breath and start again. It's all in the thumbs. Even though I haven't smoked a cigarette in over a year, I'm still amazing at rolling. The film has interesting ways of showing the degradation of Dude without the use of flashbacks, as Dude slowly begins to rebuild himself for the first hour or so. Dude has been using Stumpy's gun, but Chance decides it's time to give him back his old guns, which Dude sold when he hit the bottle. Chance bought them back because he knew that one day Dude wouldn't be in such a bad place. Dude gets his guns, gets a change of clothes, a shave, and looks like a new man, in fact. He looks so good that Stumpy takes a shot at him, thinking it's one of Brett's men. It's then that Dude realizes what he's done to himself over the last few years. It's downhill from there. The next day, Dude is blindsided by a gang of Brett's men and hogtied in a barn whilst the others go for Chance with Colorado's help. Chance defeats the men and rescues Dude. Naturally, Dude is humiliated and ashamed of himself for being captured so easily, but we know that it wasn't his fault. 4 against 1 isn't exactly fair unless you're built like an aircraft carrier. Anyway, Dude is completely demoralized and tells Chance that he's finished and he's no good anymore, as his hands are shaking so much that he can't use his guns. Chance accepts his resignation, but tells that Dude that if he goes out and gets drunk, then he won't be there to help him. The next scene is one of the best in terms of character development and growth, as Colorado is sworn in as another deputy. Dude sits and stares at a bottle of booze. He pours himself a shot. And by now, my bottom has formed an imprint on the edge of my seat as he's about to down the shot and put himself back to square one. He hears the music of a mariachi band playing in the background. The song that they play is what's known as the Cutthroat song and was requested by BDette earlier on as a kind of warning. As Dude listens, he realizes that he's needed, given that he started drinking. because the woman that he loved left him. He doesn't need to bury himself in liquor because there are people who care about him and they're in danger. Dude pours the shot back into the bottle without spilling a drop. The shaking has stopped and he's back to his old self again. Chance returns his deputy's badge. Happy days. The thought did cross my mind that even though withdrawal from prolonged exposure to any kind of nar otish or alcohol is very much real, the fact that dude felt worse after being captured and his hands only stopped shaking upon him, hearing the music of the mariachi band and coming to his senses, then his symptoms. Much have been at least partly psychosomatic. Nevertheless, it just goes to show what I always say. It takes a brave man to admit that he has a problem, but it takes a strong man to do something about it. I've never said that. Sounded good, though. Didn't it? I do find it a little bit ironic that Beret requests Ed the music to psych out his opponents, but it was that very song that caused Dude to make the right choice and better himself. A bit more irony, Dean. Martin, as a performer, was portrayed as a lush and a womanizer on stage, and yet, in one of his best roles, his character hit the bottle after having his heart broken while we're talking about Dean Martin. Let's have a chat about music. Regular readers or those who read Mind Family Guide review will know that I have a almost unnatural love of swing music. I love my rock and roll, and I'm not averse to some pop every now and again. But I always come back to swing. It's the go-to genre for me because it has a special way of making me feel good. And what annoys me is that not enough of my generation know about and can appreciate. This kind of music, it takes skill and years of dedication to perfect this kind of style. Whereas any random with a laptop and a serious hatred of their own eardrums can recreate what's in the charts today. It takes talents to get a big band together and create something wonderful. Do breath rant over anyway. Since there are 3 singers in the main cast, Dean Martin, Ricky Nelson, and Walter Brennan, it only seems appropriate that we, the audience, should hear them towards the end. The boys are gathered in the jailhouse, and with nothing else too. Do they have a little sing-song? Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson give a glorious rendition to My Rifle. Pony and Me with Ricky Nelson on guitar, and they are accompanied by Walter Brennan on the harmonica. They then sing something a little bit more Jay Get Along Home. Cindy and Walter Brennan joins in Dean Martin. Also sings Rio Bravo over the end credits. The unfortunate thing about reviewing an older film is that there's not a lot of information about the finer details of the production. Not like there is today, for example. I couldn't find any record of the budget for this movie, but I do know that it made $5.2 million at the box office. But hold on, that figure is based on 1959 rates, if the film would have been released this year, and the figures adjusted for inflation. Rio Bravo would have taken almost $45 million for a film that wouldn't have cost that much. To make, that's a good number. There was a special reason for me writing this review other than the fact that Rio Bravo is a great film and should be applauded. As such, Dean Martin was born on June 7, 1917, at time of writing today marks his 101st birthday. Happy birthday, Dean Martin. I'll finish with this. Despite the height of his fame being at around the time when not even my parents were born, I think it's a testament to Dean Martin's talent that his musical and cinematic legacy has gone on for as long as it has. There's always a danger that sheer brilliance will be lost in time, but Dean Martin and indeed the rest of the Rat Packs have proved that true class never goes out of style. At least, not while I've still got my homemade Rat Packed embroidered palm. POM's one of my go-to actions after I see a film is to look up what other critics have said. Pushes me to notice something I might have overlooked. Sometimes it validates my own "hey, that was great," or "wow, that was terrible" gut instinct. And then there are the times it just makes me feel like a stupid doof, because the critics are waxing erotic about the stunning plot or the complex characters, or "hey, didn't you just love the cinematography in the third act?" And usually this happens with a film I flat out hated or thought was trite and dull and predictable. So my reaction to that is, no. Like with this. Roger Ebert described this Howard Hawks' S.L.J. Wayne picture, the work of a master craftsman. The film is seamless. He gushed, "There is not a shot that is wrong. It is uncommonly absorbing, and the 1:41 minute running time flows past like running water." He further calls this one of John Wayne's best performances, raves about the romantic chemistry between Wayne and co-star Angie Dickinson, speaks well of singer Ricky Nelson in his supporting role, and caps that paragraph off with a nod to character actor Walter Brennan, providing comic support that never oversteps. However, I thought the whole thing was predictable. The romantic. Roger Ebert, who was raving about the film. So that left me wondering exactly what in the hell was wrong with me for missing what he saw, until I remembered that in matters of taste and aesthetics like this, my own opinion is just as valid as his. So there, and hey, apparently Eert hated The Usual Suspects and Gladiator and loved Home Alone 3. So grain of salt tradition has it that Rio Bravo was made in response to High Noon, and that Wayne signed on because he found that earlier film to be an un-American critique of McCarthyism. Both Wayne and Howard Hawks also found the plot of High Noon to be far-fetched. Hawks dismissed it as a good sheriff running around town like a chicken with his head cut off asking for help. So instead, for Rio Bravo, Wayne's Sheriff John Chance is the strong, silent type, bravely preparing to single-handedly defend his small Texas town against some bad characters, despite a whole lot of towns, people falling all over themselves to play backup. He does relent and accept help from a few folks, though Stumpy, Walter Brennan, an older and disabled sharpshooter, is left to guard the jail while the younger Colorado Ricky Nelson proves himself to be equally capable with a gun, but also smart in a crisis. And for sentiment's sake, Chance re-enlists. His old deputy dude, Dean Martin, who's showing signs of finally being ready to give up the bender, he's been on since getting dumped 2 years prior. The plot is practically non-existent, dude. Gets into a scuffle with local bad boy. Joe Beatty, a bystander, gets killed in the crossfire. Witnesses say Joe pulled the trigger, and Chance puts him in the clink and sends for a U.S. Marshal, prompting Joe's big brother, Nathan John Russell, to turn to increasingly violent stunts in an effort to persuade Chance to let Joe out while they wait. There's a blink in you, miss it. Subplot involving Angie Dickinson as a showgirl. Chance nicknames Feathers, who's half of a couple wanted for illegal gambling. But when Chance confronts her early on, she protests that she was roped into it, and Chance lets her go. But Feathers decides to stay around anyway. Having taken a shine to Chance during that one brief conversation, really the plot is just an excuse for the various characters to do random stuff Feathers, and Chance have several flirtatious arguments where he stubbornly insists she should be on the next stagecoach out of town, and she just as stubbornly insists that he should admit that he deep down likes her. Kind of dude struggles with overcoming his craving. For Booze, Colorado drifts in and out of his various scenes, sauntering in to say, he knows he's not working for Chance or anything, but he may want to hear some of the scuttlebutt he's heard around the saloon. Stumpy says colorful things. There's even a music break with Dude in Colorado, conveniently starting a sing-along, so Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson can show off their singing chops, and Chance has ample chances to look wise, stoic, big-hearted, brave, stern, or whatever random emotion the scene has decided the big hero should manifest. And, I mean, it's not that anyone is terrible in their roles. It's just that the plot points are so transparently nothing more than excuses for characters to show off. Different character traits as opposed to being things that organically happen with the most blatant of them. Let's show off this character. Plot points being reserved for Chance, piling on the heroic qualities, to the point that they are no longer character traits but rather proofs of manliness. More details in his memoir Hawks on Hawks' American Director. And producer Howard Hawks proposed that the one thing a filmmaker must prioritize above all else is the development of his characters. The plot, he argued, was secondary and of far lesser importance. You just have the characters moving around, let them tell the story for you. He advised in his 1959 Western Rio Bravo. Hawks does exactly that. The film prioritizes a quaint and cozy atmosphere over a storyline. Quentin Tarantino has described Rio Bravo as his favorite hangout movie throughout the film's 140-minute duration. The audience is made to feel like they are hanging out with and getting to know the main characters. These include Chance the Sheriff, John Wayne Dude, his washed-out Deputy Dean Martin Feathers, Chance's potential romantic interest, Angie Dickinson Colorado, a young gun Ricky, Nelson and Stumpy, the Watchman, Walter Brennan, the physical dimensions of the tiny fictional town of Rio Bravo complement the lighthearted and F-dialogue that dominates the film Hawks. Gets up close and personal with the standard one-street town of the American West shot in the desert surrounding Tucson, Arizona, where everything is a short stroll away. We follow the characters as they move from the saloons to the sheriff's office and hotel and feel increasingly at home amidst the worn-out brick walls, despite its laid-back vibe and deliberate meandering. It would be a mistake to think that the film lacks direction or purpose, for in this quiet, unassuming desert town there is a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. The Spectre of Outlaw. Nathan Barrett, John Russell haunts the sheriff, and his friend's B-Dad is plotting to free his brother who has been locked up by the sheriff for murder. Chance and his unlikely coterie are clearly the underdogs when faced with Barrett, a wealthy rancher who is easily able to buy support and has a gang of gunslingers at his command. As the tension piles up in a slow-burning fuse, the character's ability to remain jovial and in high spirits only adds to the suspense. The only thing that seems to get Chance worked up is the feisty feathers Hawks deploys, what Ernest Hemingway referred to as oblique dialogue. He describes this in his memoir as dialogue that is three-cushion, in which the characters do not make clear, straightforward statements, but instead say things in a roundabout way for added effect. Viewers will notice elements that clearly influenced and inspired Tarantino. This scene in which a band of mariachi play El de Jello, which Colorado describes as the cutthroat song, will remind audiences of Tarantino's tactful use of similar music in his films to create atmosphere and a build-up to an explosive finale, Rio Bravo, the acclaimed 1959 Howard Hawks. Western showcases a perfectly cast John Wayne in the kind of a role he defined during his 4+ decades of appearing before the camera, although aspects of the movie have a dated feel when viewed long after its release. The core story, that of an upright sheriff and a small group of stalwarts standing against a gang of gun-toting criminals, remains solid with an unnecessarily protracted running length. Of more than 140 minutes, Rio Bravo at times moves too slowly for its own good. But the climax is as rousing as that of any Western made during the decade when the genre was at its peak. As Westerns go, Rio Bravo neither attempts to nor succeeds in bringing much new to the table. The story unfolds in a 19th-century Presidio County, Texas town where Sheriff John T. Chance Wayne has locked up outlaw Jure Claude for murder. Chance is aided in his law-preserving duties by his deputies, Dean Martin, a one-time ace gunslinger turned drunk, and the aging, hobbled, stumpy Walter Brennan, who runs the town's jail. Upon hearing of his brother's incarceration, gang leader and landowner Nathan B. John Russell comes to pay a visit. He makes it clear that one way or another his brother will be walking out of jail. It's up to Chance whether he wants to get out of the way or become a casualty, although most citizens of the town fade into the background when the possibility of a shootout looks likely. Chance finds a few allies. An old buddy of the sheriff's, Pat Wheeler Ward Bond, rides into town and offers his help, and that of his new protege Colorado, Ryan Ricky Nelson, when Pat is shot dead by one of BD'd hired assassins. Chance takes it personally. Another newcomer to Rio Bravo is Feather's Angie Dickinson, a tough-talking, poker-playing woman who is attracted to the taciturn lawman. The two flirt, and the flirting turns into a stronger attachment. Finally, the owner of the local hotel, Carlos Pedro Gonzalez. Gonzalez throws in his lot with the sheriff. Rio Bravo is a favorite of both Wayne and director Howard Hawks. In fact, they liked it so much that they collaborated on two quasi-remakes, 1960 SXS El Dorado and 1970's Rio Lobo. Both of the later films again featured Wayne as the straight-as-an-arrow righteous man and followed the same general plot other than the star. However, none of the actors returned for the remakes. John Carpenter, an admitted fan of Rio Bravo, used elements of the story in both his 1976 thriller Assault on Precinct 13 and his 2001 sci-fi outing Ghosts of Mars with crooner Dean Martin and young singing sensation Ricky Nelson in the cast. The temptation to include a couple of musical numbers, My Rifle, My Pony and Mean, and Cindy, was apparently too great for Hawks to resist. One might wish he had done so. The movie grinds to a halt for what amounts to a 6-minute musical intermission on the night before the big confrontation. In his 4-star review of the film, Roger Ebert admits that the songs may be out of place while confessing his affection for them. He writes, "Does this scene feel airlifted in? Maybe, but I wouldn't do without it. For me, the movie would have been considerably stronger. Without the unfortunate interlude, it's tempting to say that John Wayne is adhering to his typical John Wayne image, and although there's some truth to that, it may be giving the actor too little credit. Wayne says a lot more with his body language than he does with his dialogue, and Chance comes across as a deeper character than one might initially. Suppose he is well matched by Angie Dickinson, and while no one is going to call the pair one of Hollywood's great screen couples, there's enough chemistry for us to ignore the nearly 25-year age gap. Dean Martin sometimes overacts, and Ricky Nelson is often badly in need of acting lessons, the always delightful. Walter Brennan provides effective comic relief. It's impossible to discuss Rio Bravo without bringing up High Noon, in large part because the former film was made in part as a repudiation of the 1952 production. Wayne was openly critical of the earlier movie, going so far as to call it un-American. It's interesting that many of Rio Bravo's most ardent supporters like Aert have voiced a dislike of High Noon more than a half-century later. Both productions are generally regarded as classics 15 years. Prior to making Rio Bravo, Hawks famously directed Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Ball into Have and Have Not, a movie that may offer the best-known example of real-life chemistry burning up the screen. Hawks was also behind the camera when the two were reunited in the big sleep. Similarities between the Wade-Dixons relationship and that of Bogart and Ball are intentional, right down to some of the dialogue. The difference was, of course, that there was no off-screen connection in Rio Bravo, and as a result, there's more smoke than fire. Rio Bravo is as much a cornerstone of Wayne's legacy as Stagecoach, The Searchers, Red River, and True Grit. It came near the apex of his popularity and became one of his best-loved outings viewed through the lens of History. Rio Bravo has lost some of its luster, and while the action sequences remain entertaining and the build-up to the final confrontation is fraught with suspense, the movie as a whole tends more toward than generic Western than Wayne's other defining films. Extra information: Ian and Don saddle up and head west for a revealing look at Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo. Yes, this is a John Wayne movie, but the 1959 epic about outnumbered lawmen in a small town beset by hired killers is as much a showcase for its supporting talent as it is for the Duke. Angie Dickinson makes her big screen debut as a traveling con artist who falls for the top-billed stoic lawman. Dean Martin co-stars as Wayne's alcoholic former deputy and teen heartthrob. Ricky Nelson shows up as an utterly mesmerizing cross between a wet behind the ears, Elvis Presley, and Han Solo. In this spoiler-filled review, the guys dig into their history with Westerns and revel in the ideas and delivery that set Rio Bravo apart, including its unexpectedly stark look at the ravages of addiction. They also make the case for Rio Bravo as a great companion piece to Barbie, appreciate character actor extraordinaire Ward Bond, and explore the wonderful world of the free blockbuster. Movement Hollywood Westerns began to fade as the middle of the 20th century ended, and the old studio system began to fall apart in the 1960s and 70s, but 1959's Rio Bravo proved that the genre still had plenty of life left in it, starring stalwart John Wayne and Cooner's Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, with Angie Dickinson in a breakout role, and a script by Jules Furthman and Leigh Brackett. The latter name is well-known to many Star Wars fans. She wrote the first draft of The Empire Strikes Back. This is a small-town Western helmed by the always dependable Howard Hawks. Wayne plays Sheriff John T. Chance, who arrests the brother of a wealthy rancher for murder and must keep him secure from the men who want to release him until a U.S. Marshal can arrive. His support group consists of a crippled old deputy known as Stumpy Walter Brennan, a former deputy, struggling to stay sober, who goes by Dude Martin, and a young gunslinger known as Colorado Ryan, who's trying to prove himself. Nelson Dickinson enters the film as Feathers, the widow of a gambler who's trying her own luck at playing cards. Chance tries to get her to leave town, but she sticks around to help in any way she can, and of course the two begin to fall for each other. However, they won't be able to have much of a relationship if they can't hold off the men trying to break into the jail and free a killer. Warner Brothers commissioned a remaster of Rio Bravo that returns the film to its technical-infused glory. As with so many films on 4K Ultra HD, you're getting the pinnacle of presentation for a classic movie. This should be the last edition of this film that fans have to buy. Unfortunately, they'll want to hang on to their older discs since Warner only included a code for a digital copy of the film. There's no Blu-ray containing the movie and the legacy extras, which has started to become a trend with the studio's recent 4K Ultra HD releases. Even when that extra Blu-ray is the same disc that's been issued before, at least we still get the bonus features. In this case, the lone extra is a legacy commentary track featuring director John Carpenter and film critic Richard Shell. Carpenter may seem like an just unusual choice for a Rio Bravo commentary track, but he's actually a big fan of the movie who used it as inspiration for his own film. Assault on Precinct 13. Carpenter is the kind of filmmaker who never shies away from voicing his opinions, and he's on point here, as he and Shell discuss the film, its place in Hollywood history, the particulars around its production, and much more. It's a worthwhile track for Rio Bravo fans. But it's a bummer that the older extras, which included a documentary about hawks, aren't found here. I should note that if you redeem the digital copy on Movies Anywhere, you get the trailer and the 8.5-minute Nye featurette Old Tucson Where the Legends Walked. It's better than nothing. But it does make me wonder why Warner Brothers didn't toss digital copies of the rest of the legacy extras in there too well. This film directed by Howard Hawks, screenplay by Jules Furthman, Leigh, Brackett. Producer by Howard Hawks, starring John Wayne, Dean Martin, Ricky Nelson, Angie Dickinson, Walter Brennan Warbond, John Russell, Pedro Gonzalez, Gonzalez Estelita, Rodriguez Cinematography, Russell Harlan, edited by Falmer Blanksted, music by Dimitri Tiomkin. Lyrics, Paul Francis Webster. Production company, Armada Productions, 1959. Running time, 141 minutes. Country, United States languages, English, Spanish. Budget, 1,405 $18.99. Box office, $5.75 million. So guys, this is the review of Rio Bravo movie, and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channels. Thanks for watching.